Jackie and I are on a mission to stop piracy.
If this were a movie, we could take on the bad guys ourselves.
But this is the real world. We need your help.
When you buy pirated movie and music, you support criminals.
Now these criminals are counterfeiting other things, like electronics and medicine.
Take action.
Demand the real thing.
Help us stop piracy.
Let's terminate it.
Welcome back. We're discussing internet file sharing of music and movies and asking, is the downloading of intellectual property a personal right or simply robbery? We're joined from Stockholm by Christian Engström, a deputy chairman of Sweden's Pirate Party, which advocates free use of artistic works online for non-commercial copying. The Pirate Party did well enough in recent European elections to send him to the European Union Parliament as its representative. From Los Angeles, we're joined by film and television composer Richard Gibbs, who scored music for at least 50 films and TV projects and played on hundreds of albums. He's organizing a Day of Sharing protest in support of artists' rights. Now, before the break, we had a poll in our chat room on the question, should all intellectual property be free for non-commercial use? We remind you it's, of course, unscientific, but it gives us an idea what the chat room's thinking, where 73% of you said yes and 27% of you said no. As we get back to our discussion, Richard Gibbs, a couple of comments there. We had that little clip of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jackie Chan doing a little public service announcement about piracy. We've had, we showed an earlier one with Jack Black. And I just wonder there's been a backlash on some of these guys when they do this because the fans feel cheated by them. It's kind of ironic. But let me get your comments on what was said earlier about the extra exposure and how it benefits or perhaps doesn't benefit the artists.
Certainly. Allow me to start off by addressing something that Mr. Engström said, which is a total fallacy, that the entertainment industry, and in particular the music industry, is holding even or doing slightly better as the years go on. Clearly he is not in the entertainment industry. Clearly he's not in the music industry. Clearly he has not paid visits to the record company. He's not talking to the studio owners, to sidemen, to engineers, to songwriters, to composers like myself who have had their standards of living just eviscerated by what's going on here. He's clueless, is what he's saying. It's absolutely not true. And these kinds of fallacies that he spreads are what gives people the impression that we're just a bunch of greedy artists. But we're working stiff like anybody else. We need to make a living. We have to. This is our source of income, is copyright. This is where we make our money.
Christian
and
Engström,
if you take that away...
Yeah. I was going to ask, Christian Engström, what is the middle ground? What is the balance? Because a lot of people feel perhaps that, you know, they are, of course, being cheated by high prices. In Europe, obviously, the price for content is much higher than, say, in America. What is the middle ground, do you feel, where artists can actually get what they deserve so they can continue to produce the content, and yet, as you say, perhaps people can have access to it in a fair way?
Again, it's important to remember we have had file sharing for 10 years, and we see absolutely no shortage of music. I mean, surely even Mr. Gibbs would concede that. It is true that the record companies are losing money, but that's because they're supplying a service that is no longer needed. It used to be that only record companies could do worldwide distribution. Now anybody can do it. But music fans are spending as much money on music, only they prefer to go to live gigs instead. And that's great.
Isn't there a moral, Mr. Engström, though, isn't there a moral issue here, though, as well, that if someone has produced content, that they have some right to ownership of it?
Well, if they publish it, they shouldn't have the right to stop other people from sharing it with friends or sharing it with other people. Because you have to look at what is the price to society. If you want to give some group or some big companies the right to control what information other people, ordinary people, send between each other, that means you have to give these companies the right to control all private communication. And that's simply not an acceptable price.
John is on the line from Scotland with something to say. John, go ahead.
Good evening to you both, or to you all.
Thank you.
I have a logical question. I can read my daily newspapers online, and that means the newspapers are not getting my income because I'm not buying it on the street. Why cannot the same logic be applied to the music industry?
Richard Gibbs.
It is applied to the music industry. You're exactly right. The newspaper industry is collapsing around us. Major newspapers in the United States, at least, are going away. They're disappearing. And as a result, we're going to end up with we're on a path to where the only news we're going to get is through bloggers. And, you know, I like to read what bloggers have to say, but I prefer to have a professional reporter give me my news. I prefer that there's somebody on the ground that knows what's going on in these locations, not somebody just spewing stuff out on the internet. And likewise, when it comes to music. Music should not be an amateur,
Right.
you know,
Richard, let me...
something is done that way.
Richard, let me put a Twitter...
by the way, I'm all for amateur musicians. I just say what we're rapidly going for is back to medieval times when we just have wandering minstrels. Well,
Richard, let me put a question that came from an interesting point made to us through Twitter from someone who used the name Dollybee. File sharing, is here to stay. You have to revolutionize the money-making model. Realistically, people are not going to stop piracy, for example. In the music industry, the role of the record label needs to be dropped or drastically changed. Now, it's interesting, many newspapers online are looking for subscription. There are different ways to get music now where there is a fee associated. Richard, do you think that there may be a way to take into account the download generation that isn't used to going in and buying CDs, DVDs, VHS in those days, DVDs and so on, and actually creating some kind of reset button where the actual business model can be changed, perhaps giving a more of a balance, which allows musicians and filmmakers and so on to continue, and yet they could still make the content perhaps a little cheaper, more accessible?
Absolutely. She hit right on the head there with that one. And Mr. Engstrom is hitting one side of it. Yes, the record companies are collapsing, and they are collapsing because they've been in the business for decades of selling plastic. They're selling plastic discs. And now the de facto distributors of music are the ISPs. They're Google, they're Pirate Bay. All of these companies, these are all, by the way, for-profit companies, including Pirate Bay. They all make money doing what they do. They just don't share it with the content makers. They are charging fees for consumers to be able to listen to music, but they aren't paying anything to the people who actually create the music or the movies or the television shows or the photographers and everybody else. We're all being hurt by this current economic model. And the answer is yes, it can be done. There are many different models that have been presented out there. One would be a micropayment system, where it's automatic. A reasonable fee would be charged every time you download a song, regardless of where you download it from. Maybe it's a dime, maybe it's a quarter. That's a matter of negotiation. But it's automatic. It'd just be tacked onto your ISP bill. Right. The technology exists right now to make that happen.
Christian Engstrom, there's a question that came in, or a comment from our Facebook page, where Asif Qaid in Pakistan wrote in saying, this phenomenon cannot be stopped. Artists earn huge revenue from touring and commercials and the royalties they get from airing songs on the radio and so on. In Pakistan, very few movies make their way to the cinemas, and the rest of Hollywood movies are available everywhere, which again, made from illegal file sharing over the internet. Now, he raises an interesting point here that as high-speed internet spreads across the world, the access that people will have to content will increase dramatically, especially when you have countries like India and China coming on, and if they're taking all this content without paying any kind of royalties, any kind of fees, isn't that going to start to show on the bottom line when it comes to movie studios and the artists as well? I mean, the scale of it is much smaller now than it could be. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, possibly, but that's because the world is changing. And if the big film and record companies want to stay in business, they have to adapt one way or another. I've been an entrepreneur myself for 10 years. And the first thing, your first responsibility as an entrepreneur or as a businessman is to figure out a way to relate to reality and to find a business model that works for you. If the record companies can't do it, well, then they should disappear. That's called a market economy. Same thing with the big film companies.
Richard Gibbs, an interesting point as we're sort of coming towards the end is one thing that does happen with download stuff, with pirated stuff, is quality diminishes. Now, for someone like yourself, of course, you take a lot of trouble putting together your music and creating high-level or high-fidelity content. Do you think the consumers are really letting down their the patrons, if you like, the musicians, by accepting much lower quality with the downloaded stuff?
Well, actually, I disagree. I mean, the downloaded quality, if it's done on a high bandwidth, is right. It's on a par with the original master. That's not.
I guess I was thinking more of movies
really an issue.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more of movies, perhaps.
Well, as FiOS comes into play, as fiber optic comes in, and internet speeds and hard drives and computers become faster and faster, you'll be able to download movies in just a few short minutes. Mm-hmm. So, and at perfect quality. So that's not really the issue at hand here. But a lot of what Mr. Engstrom says is they're just fallacies. They're
Richard,
not true.
I've got to stop you there only because we're out of time. Of course, this is an issue that will go on, and we will hopefully debate it again. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for being with us too. On the next show, Sri Lanka's civil war has ended, but the suffering continues for hundreds of thousands of refugees stuck in government-run camps. What options are being considered for them? Remember, you can follow me on Facebook, and feel free to send in your questions and comments for the show. From me and the team, see you next time.